Hello and welcome to The Clear Voice, brought to you by Clear Career Professionals. I'm your host, James Groom. This week we are joined by Clear's president, Michael Boese. Michael, welcome back to the show and thanks for being with us.
Yeah, great to be on again, James. It's been a really busy couple of weeks. We were able to attend the ICMA conference down in Tampa Bay. I really was able to connect with a number of great city leaders down there. Such a beautiful city, and ICMA did a wonderful job of putting on the conference. Then we traveled back and wrapped up last week at the Texas Municipal League Conference. Had a lot of great people come by and visit us at our booth. We had Joseph Turner from City Manager Unfiltered hanging out with us, and naturally he's an advocate for city managers across the country, and it brought a lot of good conversation, and we were happy to have him. I'm excited for the wrapping up of 2025. It looks like we're going to have some really amazing recruitments coming out. Excited for people to come check out our website and potentially look at those opportunities to transition their careers into either additional leadership roles or moving their impact to other communities.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys were very busy, and I think we have a bunch of upcoming recruitments that maybe we can't speak about just yet, but they should be hitting our website and LinkedIn fairly shortly.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great. Clear and the team of folks we have are certainly building a reputation for being candidate focused and also making sure that the cities have just the most qualified candidates applying for their positions. As we wrap up the year, we're going to be upwards of 10 to 12 new jobs coming on our website, and just honored to be selected by these communities to run their recruitments and continually building that trust. We'll be pushing out an amazing city manager who was hired down in Freeport. Her agreement was recently approved this week. And so Danielle Kelly will be moving into that role and bringing some great leadership to the city of Freeport. Looking for that announcement coming out on LinkedIn here shortly.
Well, that's amazing. And I guess the recruiters will be keeping me busy with the podcast, and I'm really thankful for that.
The position podcast, every time that we meet with the candidates, especially when we get to the semifinalist interviews or finalist interviews, are appreciative of the position podcast. Matter of fact, Danielle Kelly, who is going to be moving down to Freeport, heard the position podcast from her position in Florida and decided to apply for the Freeport position based on your conversation with the mayor and looking at the opportunities and things that could happen down in Freeport. We are definitely reshaping how recruitment is done by providing candidates with the maximum amount of information about the position, but also the culture and what's the potential impact that they can have as a leader.
Yeah, the mayor was definitely very interesting and fun to talk to, and I like getting to hear from the leaders of local communities and what they need in their candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a great journey, and I know that we'll keep reshaping those position podcasts, and hopefully we'll transform the way in which recruitment's done all across the country as other people realize the value of having the position podcast and being able to advertise that. Super excited to be on today with your guest. I've had some interactions with him and really impressed by his career and all of the things that he's done for communities.
Yeah, this week we wanted to talk about something that every city manager, city attorney, elected official, and definitely the police chief should always keep in the front of their minds, and it's the relationship between law enforcement and the diverse communities we serve, focusing on fairness, trust, and accountability, and how they intersect with culture, identity, and public safety. So this week we are honored to be joined by Dr. Alex Del Carmen. He's a leading authority on policing practices and community trust. Dr. Del Carmen is the founder of Del Carmen Consulting. He's a nationally recognized authority on police accountability practices, particularly racial profiling. For the past 29 years, he has trained every police chief in Texas and taught thousands of officers and federal agents across the country. He has taught at the FBI National Academy and written extensively on many policing issues. He currently serves as a special master for the U.S. District Court in Puerto Rico. Dr. Del Carmen has also enjoyed a long academic career and currently serves as the Texas A&M Regents Professor at Tarleton State University, where he founded the first doctoral program in the university's 125-year history. Dr. Del Carmen is a Fulbright specialist named by the U.S. State Department and assigned to train police professionals in the Czech Republic. Dr. Del Carmen, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Such a pleasure to see you guys and hear your voices again.
Well, we appreciate having you on, and especially as a Tarleton alumni, I'm even more impressed to be able to pull you onto the show.
Go Texans, and as we often say, let's bleed purple all day.
Yes, sir. Dr. Del Carmen, you've had a remarkable journey that shaped both your life and career in criminology and police reform. Before we get into your research and consulting work, can you just tell us a little bit about your early life and what experiences set you on the path of studying criminology and working with law enforcement?
Yeah, it's a great question. And once again, thank you for the honor of being with you guys today. I'm a big fan of your podcast, and I oftentimes think about the utility that it serves cities across the United States, and particularly in our great state of Texas. I will say that my journey was a long journey and one unexpected, really. I was born in Nicaragua, that is in the middle, right in the midst of Central America. My father was a U.S. citizen, but we didn't know about it. And so it's kind of an interesting dynamic that played out. My grandparents both migrated from Lebanon. They were both Lebanese Christians, Maronite Catholics, really. They met right outside Ellis Island, New York, and they transitioned to Nicaragua, where my grandfather changed his last name from Karam to Del Carmen so that people could pronounce it in Latin America. Well, my grandmother had the foresight of inscribing my dad at the U.S. Embassy in Nicaragua, but we never knew about it. Dad came to high school here in the States. He came to college in the States, went to Europe for his master's degrees, went back to Nicaragua, married mom. And then, for whatever reasons, grandma just never told him that. Growing up in Nicaragua, we had a civil war, as some people may remember in your audience. And then soon thereafter, we lived under communism. And both of them were very, very incredible experiences that really reshaped the way that I saw the world. But more importantly, I found a piece of paper in my grandmother's old things that said that my dad was inscribed in the U.S. Embassy. And I hardly spoke English, but I went up to my dad and I said, "This looks important." And he took it to the U.S. Embassy, and $50 later, and a long conversation with the ambassador led to him having a U.S. citizenship overnight. So it's really one of those stories that goes in the chronicles of movies and storytellings for grandchildren one day, perhaps.
It's amazing to think what would have happened if you had never found that piece of paper.
Right. I certainly wouldn't have been here. And, I talk about my sister and my brother and really our kids now, but, none of this would have happened. Right. So this conversation would not be taking place. And I often say that the good Lord sometimes has plans for us that we cannot count on or foresee.
So you've experienced life under war and communism, and then, of course, immigrating to our country. How did those experiences shape your views on justice?
Well, I think you get to appreciate the Constitution of the United States a lot more when you're born in a place that doesn't have one, right? At the age of 12, my hobby was to pick up bullet shells off the ground and sadly get to witness people getting killed across the street from where we lived, seeing airplanes pass by and bomb neighborhoods. And so that level of violence, I think being exposed to that at a tender age of 12 really left a mark in my heart. I often began to wonder why it is that human beings do that to each other, and why it is that humans have the capability of violence to that extent. And I think that really led to my curiosity as to try to understand and wrap my arms around the mystery of crime. Why would somebody with all the opportunities and blessings that this country can give a person, and there are many, and I often say that one thing that made me understand through communism, making a line to get a bag of beans and make a line to get a toilet paper a week as you've been assigned, and all the horrible things that are associated with that completely oxymoronic system that some people claim to be ideal. I claim to be really probably the most horrible invention that human beings can come up with. I often say that when you think about that and you think about those experiences and you come to the United States, I just scratched my head and I said, why would anybody want to commit a crime when this is the land of opportunities? I mean, you can really do whatever you want to do and help out society, make money, build a reputation, hopefully a good one, and help out, your fellow men and women in the greatest country that ever existed on the face of this earth. And so I really wanted to understand that. And so that led me to the curiosity of studying criminology.
So when you came here and you devoted your life to that, and, correct me if I'm wrong, but, you were one of the first people that really started researching racial profiling and how it impacts communities. I don't think that term was even part of the national conversation when you started delving into it. What inspired you to take on that work so early, and what kind of reaction were you seeing?
That's exactly right. So I started doing research on the concept of driving while black or racial profiling. Some people had different names, attributed to it, but they were all lay terms. What really led my curiosity to study it was the fact that I believed then, as I believe now, 29 years later, that most police officers in the United States are honest, decent, hardworking people. and that they really come from a really good place, right? I've always believed that a law enforcement professional in this country is someone that really had that conversation with their inner self about whether or not they would be willing to give their life for somebody, in the midst of it all. So I wanted to really understand why there were a few, but still, albeit a few, that did not follow that course, that really got into this profession, to the very noble profession, for the wrong reasons. And I've always felt that good cops are the first ones to not want a bad cop to work along with them. And so what ended up happening was I began to study it. I began to research it, and it fascinated me that there were police departments where you will have 100 officers, or one that would have 20 officers, right? Which is most of Texas, right? Which is rural law enforcement agencies. But yet in those 20 officers, you would have one that was very opinionated about the concept of race and how certain people were inferior to that person because of the fact that they were born in a different part of the world, as I was, or that perhaps had a different skin color, or that perhaps had an accent, or that perhaps were the wrong gender. And so I began to study that, and as a Catholic, and I'm a devout Catholic, I'll say that, have been and will continue to be very loyal to the church and to God. That foundation led me to really be inspired to try to understand it from a scientific perspective, and that's what really led to my studies on racial profiling.
I definitely would agree with your assessment that it's, a very small minority of police officers that take the wrong turn. They say one bad apple spoils the bunch, and I would also agree that those of us who are trying to do the right thing, we know that just that one bad apple makes all of our lives so much more difficult. So throughout the years, you've trained basically every police chief in Texas. From your perspective, what separates truly effective police leaders from those who struggle to either connect or adapt?
Well, as they often say, and I will say, even though I was born overseas, I've been in Texas almost 3 decades, and that makes me a Texan. And I oftentimes say that one of the reasons why I get along with law enforcement so well is because I speak straight. I don't ever deviate from what I believe I see and what I interpret. And I'll just say it in that spirit here in your podcast, which is that there are those that talk the talk, and there are those that walk the walk. And I will tell you, I have been just inundated with people that have said to me, Dr. Del Carmen, I really want to understand. I want to know if I have a problem in my agency. But then when and I often tell them, and especially now, right, that I'm on my third lap of my career, and I oftentimes say, if you don't want to know the truth, don't hire me. Don't come to me because I'm the wrong guy to hire. Go hire one of these other talking heads that will charge you much less than I will. They're a lot cheaper, and they're also going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. And you can certainly, make your city manager very happy. Everybody's going to do the kumbaya and be happy at the end of the day. But when a lawsuit comes your way, stand ready because somebody like me is going to be on the other side. And I have to go to sleep every night with peace in my heart that I've said and I've done the right thing every day. That's my balance, and that's my checkpoint. So what I have found in the course of training every chief of police since 2001 is that there are those individuals that really mean it, and they come up to me and say, Dr. Del Carmen, I'm not afraid to find out. And these are my terms, not anybody else's terms. But I often say, do a colonoscopy of the data and go find out and see exactly what's going on. And so I do a deep dive. And sometimes, more often than not, I find these issues. But the chief just embraces that and changes it. Boy, that is so inspiring, James. I tell you, when I see a chief of police that has the courage to hear the truth and the embracement and the leadership to do something good about it and turn it around, man, it makes me want to wake up in the morning every day and do this over and over again.
Yeah. And Dr. Del Carmen, I wanted to just kind of comment on that a little bit. I really appreciate the training that you do, and having been a chief of police and went through your program myself, I think that's extremely valuable. We had a conversation a couple weeks ago on our podcast about the organizational assessments we do. And while they're very different from looking at the racial profiling that you do, quite frequently we find those chiefs of police who do speak a good game, maybe talking about how they, want to do a good thing or those things. But when we really dive into the actual organization, it's much different. And they're not always readily willing to accept, some of those recommendations to improve, their organizational culture or those things. I have the opportunity to teach at Leadership Command College, and one of the courses I teach is police legitimacy. Having done that for almost a decade now, it's always amazing to me how important the concept of trust is with the communities that we serve. You've learned to speak about trust in such a way where it's just a word we say. And, everybody knows that it's kind of the buzzword. Hey, we're going to build trust with our communities. But, really it's those police leaders who can get in and not just build trust with the actions of the police department, but actually build trust with the intentions of the police department, to where your community looks at the department and understands that the heart of the agency is its service. And just, I kind of wanted to see what your thoughts were as, you deal with these organizations, and, maybe what could they do to really show and demonstrate that they're not just out there speaking the right words.
Well, I think that, particularly minority communities, right, in the United States, for various reasons, historical and perhaps even contemporary reasons, you find that the Hispanic community, for instance, which is significant in Texas, the African American community, which is growing, the Middle Eastern community, which is also growing. If you look around the diversification of our great state, many of these communities come from countries, those that migrated, like myself, where the essential functioning of the government is completely broken. And so by instinct, by the mere arrival, it's not that anybody in the United States did anything to them. It's just the fact that their experiences are very suspicious of government as an entity. And so they show up to the States and they think it's this sort of a continuation of that, right? And then when you have somebody come out in a nice suit or with the impressive stars around your collar, and you start speaking this very sophisticated language through their perspective, they are like, well, this is one more person that's going to feed me, all sorts of garbage. But they don't really mean what they say. So I think there's an innate suspicion that comes into that conversation. And I think for leaders in the community, both city managers as well as police chiefs, I always say to them, speak plainly and directly, and also make sure that your actions follow what you're saying. And I'll tell you a quick story. I was at a town hall meeting at a place in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. This is many years ago. And a new chief had actually been named for this particular city. And it was a town hall meeting. And I was invited to go. And I'm sitting all the way to the back. The town hall meeting was made up of probably 65% minority. And I say that to highlight the following point. There was an older woman who was probably in her 80s in a wheelchair. And she gets to the mic and she says to the new chief, she says, Chief, our previous chief, your predecessor, used to give us his cell number. And I realized that's unusual, but she says, whenever we had a concern in the minority community, we would pick up the phone and call him. And he was always so polite and so attentive. And even when we were wrong, he would sort of guide us and shepherd us through that process. And we would all, at the end of the day, hug each other and say, we're part of this community. We're going to work together. Would you do the same as your predecessor? And I'll never forget this, Michael. And this is for maybe something you can use in your LCC classes, but right, and the various classes that you teach. The chief of police looked at her and says, I'll share my number with you. It is 911. And I remember everyone sort of had that moment of, my gosh, what just happened here? But I understood then that although he was trying to make a joke out of it, really what he just told that community member was, you're going to get a hold of me by showing up to the office and making an appointment. I'm not going to give you that personal relationship touch that you had with the previous chief. I'm not that person. And I tell you what, this guy lasted probably less than 6 months. There's a reason for that, right? So I think that community trust, that outreach to the community has to be more than just lip service.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. I know that, one thing that I tried to do and learned in my career from a lot of great mentors is that personal connection. And so, I did have my cell phone number on my business card. I still have that same cell phone number today, whether it was the chief of police or city manager or whatever community I was representing. I handed that out. What was astonishing to me was I really didn't receive a ton of calls on it. I think people understood that it was my personal cell phone number and respected that for the most part. I mean, it was really good. I love what you're saying because, there's probably a lot of police executives and city managers who have missed that personal contact with their community. You go to the office and they do a good job as an administrator and they're kind of keeping the lights on and, they're doing all of the things that people would picture maybe an executive doing. But actually getting out and mixing with the people in their community, it's reserved for maybe National Night Out or once or twice a year. But they're not delving into building those relationships where people actually see them as a very human partner in making their community great.
And I would also argue that the investment that you make by building those bridges with the community, as you well know, because you did the same when you were chief, when you build those bridges, when that moment comes, where the community has a saying, perhaps in your future and even the future of the PD, they're going to be the first ones to stand in front of the cameras, the first ones to stand in front of the press and say, don't touch our chief and don't touch the police officers here. They are partners. They are open. And there's nothing more powerful to a very liberal press and to attorneys that want to sue you for a hobby to stand in front of those individuals of color that are pointing the finger next to the chief of police saying, he or she is the person that I want to stay here for a long time. And we support that person because when things were not in front of us, when the cameras were not rolling, this person was real. This person made us feel like we were part of a family. And we worked with this chief, regardless of his or her skin color, to work together as a community. And I tell you, it's an investment that is worth making that I have seen in 29 years, working very closely with chiefs of police across the state of Texas and across the U.S. I've seen that over and over again. Talking about a powerful message, which is make the community your partner, regardless of political inclinations, regardless of what politicians are telling you, regardless of what the media is saying, one way or another. We work for the community. The people that are paying the salary of every city manager and every chief of police are people that are paying taxes. Ultimately, they are the bosses of every public servant in that community. There's no mystery to this. But I think that message is oftentimes lost in translation.
No, I don't want to steal, the show from James here. I feel like I'm talking too much, James, but what Dr. Del Carmen is talking about is really, striking a chord with me in the sense that it's a number of the small things that we do in government that impact people's lives. And that's not to say you don't need to have, the bigger programs or that I'm trying to throw shade on things that are in place that are naturally helping large groups of people. Some of the best times in my career have been those one-on-one moments where you got to do something for somebody. And that could even be, changing a tire. I know sometimes when I was a chief of police, I would often do things that maybe other chiefs weren't doing, where I would pull over and change a tire. And hopefully that person, you would recognize that it was just an officer that was doing that. But what I saw was that my officers would also see that I was willing to do those things and valued those things. And it created that culture where, hey, let's focus on the small things, because that's where your greatest relationships are built. And then those people go and tell, a dozen people, hey, you know what happened here in this city? This officer carried my groceries in, or they helped me cross the street. And that's where those real community ties are built. You kind of see those things.
There's no question. And to your point, they don't have to be huge things, right? You don't have to have a massive community meeting where you're feeding everybody and you're spending thousands of dollars. I mean, it's the everyday stuff, right? And I often tell chiefs, by the time that I meet them, most of them have been around at least one or two police departments. The old saying about chiefs retiring, they never retire. They just kind of recycle to another city. When I sit down and have lunch conversations with them, I say to them, whatever brought you to law enforcement in the first place? Oh, Dr. Del Carmen, it was to protect and serve. I just wanted to save somebody. I was 21 years old and man, I just wanted to go in there and kick some butt and take some names and save the innocent person from the fire and help rescue a kid from an abusive family. And I said, so where is that dream now? And oh, there's so much paperwork. There's the budget, and then there's this, there's that, there's the other. I think to some degree, as you get promoted in the ranks of law enforcement, we begin to lose sight of that original, very innocent premise that to some degree we've all had, right? In my case, to serve as a criminologist, as I often say, to serve those that serve you all. And then in the sense of police officers and police professionals, I think there's a disconnect at some point. Not everyone does it. I mean, there are people like you guys that get up in the morning and you have that gut check, right? That reminds you as to why you're doing what you're doing. But there are people that end up in the bureaucratic, mess that sometimes cities and counties they bring to the table, which is part of the job. But they lose sight of that moment when that real human being really needs you. And it would be so important for you to be there for them and for them to be there for you, because it reminds you, it keeps you human, it keeps you real, and it keeps recycling back those original premises of why you do what you do.
Dr. Del Carmen, we reach a lot of city managers through this podcast, and some of those folks obviously don't come up through policing and have limited knowledge about operations. What are some of those things that are either green flags or red flags that they could be looking at in their police departments to know whether they're on the right track or if they need to, kind of intercede? Maybe not, that they're super failing. Those are usually obvious, but, maybe they're on the right path or they need a little guidance.
Yeah, I think that, for me, the biggest piece of advice that I would give a city manager would be ask the questions that are not being asked. And I say that because I think that oftentimes when you're a city leader, and I've seen this firsthand, I've dealt with many of them in the course of my career, city managers are told what other people want them to hear. I was hired by one of them specifically some years back because there were suspicions that the chief of police was racist. And we did an investigation. This is outside of the internal affairs investigation. We just did a deep dive, talked to the officers, the community meetings and whatnot. We found out that this guy had been a problem for, 7 or 8 years. But the city manager was the last person to learn about it because oftentimes that inner circle of city management are people that are sucking up to that person, telling them things that, it's like, for instance, why would I want to do an organizational assessment? Why would I want to have Michael come out here and do this? Because we're perfect. We're great. We don't have any issues. Plus, it's too expensive. We can do this ourselves. We can partner with a local community college and get it done. Or I can go to ChatGPT and figure it out. But what they don't understand is that the city manager should be skeptical of people that tell him or her that from the standpoint that the mere presence of that argument is concerning. If I'm in charge of a police department, I know that I'm far from being perfect. I know that there are loopholes out there that are going to get me probably fired. So what I want to do is I want to hire the very best brain that I can bring to that department, or brains in plural, bring them on board and say to them, help me out. Let me know what it is that I'm not seeing that can get us in trouble one day. And I cannot tell you the commonality among police agencies and city managers and cities that get sued successfully by these entities is none of them saw it coming. And none of them thought that the area that they were sued on was going to be a vulnerable area. That's because you look at, for instance, the concept of deliberate indifference, which is the idea that you're doing something intentionally and that you're being completely absent to remedying the issue. You can go to a lawsuit against any city in the state of Texas and throughout the United States, and they almost always include that concept of deliberate indifference. This is what lawyers love to pick on. And the one thing that they'll say is you knew the problem was there, but you did nothing to resolve it. You knew that the city was not in compliance with racial profiling. You knew that the city was not reporting the numbers accurately. You knew that some of your officers were recording Hispanics as whites. But somebody at the police department kept on telling you that things were copacetic and that all you had to do was fill out a form and at the T-Call once a year, and off you went. Because, quote unquote, T-Call took it, is my favorite line that they often say. Well, T-Call is going to take a napkin if you put data in a napkin and send it into them. They're a repository of the data. They're not supposed to be going over your data for accuracy and inconsistencies. But they open themselves up to these issues because they don't ask the right question and they don't go outside that circle that frankly lies to them.
Yeah, I've seen that, and thank you for saying that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've got going on coming up in the future and a little bit about Del Carmen Consulting and what services you provide and how people can reach you?
Sure. So first and foremost, something that you don't know about me that I didn't send to you prior to this podcast on purpose is that I actually went back to school about 3 years ago. Most people that know me, they were like, you went back to school to do what beyond a PhD? And I said, well, I wanted to learn. I had seen in the course of 29 years working with law enforcement that there was a huge deficit in training. And I felt that the training aspect of law enforcement was something where we could really target and address by ensuring that the people that we recruit and bring to law enforcement are people that are, first of all, trainable. And secondly, that we can actually train them in a way that we can also mold them and give them not what was being taught in 1974 circa, but rather what is being taught today. Understanding the complexities of learning and education, and that people may be ADHD or may have components that really block their ability to assimilate the information. And so I was very, very ambitious. I said a lot of prayers, and I applied to the top school that does this, which is Harvard, and I got accepted. And so this past year, I just finished my master's degree at Harvard. I was about the only conservative voice in the classroom, which is fine. But nevertheless, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how to really try to modify and apply teachings to different scenarios. And so I volunteered this past summer as a pro bono a component to basically go in there and redo the racial profiling course for TCOL. And TCOL accepted my offer, and I'm proud to say that now the new course is now in place. That the course that they had in place was 20 plus years old, and nobody knows where it came from, that kind of thing. And so what I've also decided to do is to transition out of academia. I've spent 29 years and it's been an amazing journey. I spent 16 years at UT Arlington, almost 17, and then now almost 12 years at Tarleton. And my dream had always been to create a PhD program for practitioners, for cops, and we did that. The good Lord put me at Tarleton, and we were the first PhD program in its 125-year history. And now Tarleton has 9 PhD programs, and it's growing even more. In fact, James, I would argue you need to stop by and see it. We have a campus that keeps on growing, and students that we don't know where to put at this point because it's gone so well for us. So it's time. You'll know that there's a time and a place for everything. And I had long conversations with the good Lord and many others with my wife, and we decided that it was time to really transition out of academia. And so I'm going to go into consulting full time, something that I love doing. And what I have been doing with Del Carmen Consulting is trying to expand its wings, to also continue to do the racial profiling template and the analysis on data. But I'm doing a lot more than that, right? So I'm now working with Fort Worth Police Department, trying to apply what they call a constitutional policing unit, which is a concept about bringing constitutionality to policing, even though we all know that, again, most law enforcement has it in place. But the idea is to look for those loopholes, to look for those areas that can sneak around a chief. And what's beautiful about that concept, which I helped develop with Eddie Garcia when he was in Dallas, I'm still very much part of that team as well, is the idea of you don't have to be big, you don't have to be sophisticated, you don't have to have a huge budget to do that. You can simply bring people like me to the department and say, hey, look for those loopholes and do an assessment. And so what I do is I go in there and I look, for instance, at internal affairs and their investigatory components, whether or not they're following protocol, they're following policy. What are the system-like issues? Not internal affairs, per se, not do an investigation on an officer. We look at systems. We look at areas that are flawed, and we try to remedy those areas with the ability or hope that at some point the city will not be sued on those areas and will actually self-correct. And so that to me is probably one of the biggest lessons that I've learned over the course of the years, even though DOJ is no longer the DOJ that it used to be prior to the Trump administration. A lot of those lawyers are now working for private firms and nonprofit groups, and they're still suing police departments left and right. That's what people don't really understand. They think that the threat level is gone, and therefore we can sit back on our laurels and sort of count our beans. And I got to tell you, it's quite the opposite. There's been more lawsuits that have been filed against law enforcement since January 20th, all the way up to now, on organizational mismanagement, on racial profiling issues, on these loopholes. And that's why I think the work that you guys do is also so important.
Well, thank you, and congratulations on your new degree. And of course, we wish you all the best in building that consulting firm, going full time on that. I think you'll be very successful. I know your work ethic, and I think you'll be doing great things. So we appreciate that. Before we get off here, can you leave young leaders with just a short message? What would you want them to take away?
Yeah, before I do that, I want to once again thank you both for allowing me to be part of this podcast. It's such an honor to be here and with both of you. I know your work and I know who you are, and I know that it's amazing that you're providing the service to others. Secondly, you had asked me a question about how to get a hold of me. If they go to www.delcarmenconsulting.com, they will be able to find me there, and they can certainly drop an email, and I'll be happy to chat with anyone. As far as leaving a message, an important message to young leaders out there, both in the law enforcement industry and city management, I would say that right now we're at a point in history where probably none of us saw each other be at any point in our careers, whether it's the end of your career or the beginning of your journey. These are challenging times. The country's divided. Politics seem to have taken over. Media seems to be distorted more so than it's ever been. People have opinions that are not based on science on both sides. And I would say to you that aside from having our faith and having belief in our great system, I would say that it's also upon us to be prepared to go into that battlefield. Not only to be prepared emotionally, but also to be prepared mathematically, to be prepared. There are a lot of toolkits out there, a lot of resources out there, like you guys, for instance, and what you provide. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to take that step forward in that leap of faith that says, you know, if things are great, wonderful, but at least I need to have somebody else tell me that instead of having the same cycle of people that are there to just really repeat what they have been indoctrinated to say in that very small circle that they're not affected by. And they really, some of them are genuinely telling you what they believe because they've never seen another side of the coin. All they've seen is this sort of 8 to 5 job where things are just fantastic because nobody's complaining. And you know what tell agencies when nobody complains? I'm really worried because there's a reason why people are not complaining. Either they don't have the avenue to do so, they don't have the trust with the PD to do so, or they're really holding back for the big event to take place, right? So I often say to them, the absence of a negative doesn't mean the presence of a positive.
Yeah, it's great words. Michael, do you have anything for us before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, I want to thank Dr. Del Carmen for coming on. And Dr., for myself, my faith is very important to me. And I know for our company and a lot of people involved in our company, we're unique in the aspect that we want to have an impact. We're not doing this work to become, millionaires. We really want to continue the blessings that God has given us in our career and continue those ways in which we can help communities. And so anything that we can do to support you, we definitely want to do that. There is so much need, not just here in Texas, but throughout the country for people to have that voice and really help organizations, whether it's the police or the city administration side, just continually grow and develop their communities. I want to let you know that anything that we can do as an organization to help and be there for you as you, go off on this new venture, please feel free to utilize us any way that you possibly can. I really appreciate the conversations we've had today. And the fact that in those organizations, what I see probably like you is a lot of really good people, maybe with a lot of really good intentions, but often they need somebody to come in and just help them either reassess or reprioritize, where their organizations are going. And so, yeah, I think it'll be a great conversation. But again, thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of what we've got going on here. And we will be very prayerful for you in the future.
Thank you, Michael. And I will also tell you that the same goes to you guys, right? Whatever I can do for you all, let me know. I will tell you that to me, what's helped me, and perhaps those in the audience that at some point want to go into this journey of consulting work and working for agencies in the future, is a very simple premise that I live by, which I really haven't really shared with others. And in fact, your podcast is probably the first time that many people that think they know me they've actually heard me say this because now I feel the freedom of being almost retired from the state where I can say things that before I couldn't say. But I will tell you this, my entire journey has been about God and has been about faith. I have never intended to do anything to harm anyone except to help other people. When even potential clients or people that disagreed with my premise about a police shooting or a media comment that I made, and they wanted to punish me by not giving me a contract, or maybe even allow me to sit at the table on something that perhaps I knew something about, and they feel like they're punishing me by doing that, they don't realize that people like me, all that does is an opportunity for me to pray for them. And I just turn around, I look at them, I smile, and I just say a prayer. I really do. I pray my rosary every morning. I go to mass every Sunday. That's the way I live my life. And I never also had any intentions of getting rich, of being a millionaire. Told my kids this. I'm going to make sure I pay for your tuition, make sure you're both educated. Well, I have now a medical doctor and a lawyer. And I said to them, once you both have your careers and you're in the right path, I'm going to sit back and just whatever the Lord sends my way, I will get. But there's never been a mission that money dictates who I am and what I do. It's always been about being able to say my nightly prayer and say, Lord, I did the best that I could with what I have. Life is too short to do otherwise. And I learned that lesson in Nicaragua when I was a young man. And that's the premise in which I've lived. And I didn't know you guys base your life on that premise as well. But, the things that the good Lord does sometimes when bringing people like us together, even on a podcast like this, to share with others. And hopefully we've touched somebody's heart today. So thank you both.
Yeah, that's definitely what it's all about. Hopefully we've provided somebody just any little piece of information that will help them better themselves. Thank you, Michael, for being with us as always. Dr. Del Carmen, we appreciate your time today, your insight, and your longstanding service to law enforcement and the communities they serve. Your work has already made a lasting impact across the country, and we wish you the best as you begin the new expanded chapter in your journey. Thank you for everybody listening to The Clear Voice. Be sure to follow Clear Career Professionals on LinkedIn and check out our website to see current leadership opportunities and learn more about the Clear Way. We'll catch you next time.